Yeah, when last we met, you might recall that John just whispered, "Lies, lies, lies," to Bloody Johnny while he was giving a speech about the Saxon Arch. His efforts had been so great that his dizziness came back upon him with a rush. So blindedly it came that everything swam before his eyes, and he began swaying to and fro at the foot of the platform, groping at the air with his hands and gurgling in his throat. As he swayed like this, all began to grow dark before him, and he had just time to think to himself, "What have I done? Have I ruined his speech?" when he fell prone on the ground in a dead faint. The speaker had drawn back a little towards the center of the platform, so that when old Bob Shepherd and Mr. Merry, with the help of two other younger men, lifted John up and carried him towards the rotunda, all that crossed Garrett's mind was, "Someone has fainted." And it never occurred to him to associate the incident with the convulsed face and the word lies. One of the officials produced the keys of the rotunda, and here they laid John. But it was not till the mayor's speech was over and the crowd had dispersed that he really awoke to full consciousness. "People say these things are lies," shouted Mr. Garrett after a pause, in a voice that rolled away over that hypnotized assembly with such thunderous force that it reached the ears of Mad Bet, as kneeling at her window on the other side of the road she thought of Codfin's iron bar. "People say we must have the naked truth in place of these lies. Now what the spirit and the blood command me to tell you is this." An inspiration was reaching him at last from the dark recesses of his being. It seemed to tear itself through him and force its way out, like a dragon escaping from a thunder-split cavern. And Mr. Garrett felt himself in full command of this inspiration. And like Foss, with his earth spirit, Mr. Garrett held the bridle of this demonic winged creature. This was proved by the dramatic pause he made at this point, quietly taking his breath and, as he did so, glancing towards the rotunda where they had taken that person who had fainted. Then, as if he were releasing in absolute aplomb this wind dragon of the abyss, he lifted up his voice again. "Any lie," he shouted. "I tell you, any lie, as long as a multitude of souls believes it, and presses that belief to the crackling point, creates new life, while the slavery of what is called truth drags us down to death and to the dead. Lies, magic illusion, these are names we give to the ripples of the water of our experience when the spirit of life blows upon it. I have myself," here he made another of his dramatic pauses, "I have myself cured a woman of cancer in that spring." He stretched out his arm towards the Grail font. "Miracles are lies, and yet they are happening. Immortality is a lie, and yet we are attaining it. Christ is a lie, and yet I am living in him. It is given unto me to tell you that if any man brought a dead body before me, in the power of what people call a lie, I would, even now, here and beyond you all, restore that dead one to life." His voice died away in a silence so profound that Nancy Stickles, whose face was distorted with emotion, told Tossie later that she could hear the tinkle of the faraway sheep bell on the throat of Tupper, the old fence-breaking ram, in the Eggerly Great Field. Heavily and awkwardly, and all hunched up, his broad back stooping as if a weight beyond what he could bear had been laid upon it, Mr. Garrett now began shambling down from the platform. Having reached the ground, he stood for a time with his whole massive body bent forward and his eyes tightly shut. At last, waving his hand every now and then to keep away anyone who approached him, he moved slowly down the slope towards the road. There were so many conflicting accounts of what now happened that a compilation of them all and a comparison of them with one another would have leave upon the mind a feeling that certain great human events do not occur in a direct, clear-cut, absolute manner, but include a wavering margin of actuality which changes its accordance with the human medium through which it passes. Well, I guess that's fair enough to say. As he came down the hill, the bulk of the people remained perfectly motionless, save for an attempt to pursue him with their eyes. He seemed protected, isolated, defended from intrusion by some interior power. It was not long, however, before a little group of devotees who were now pushing their way towards him made a kind of half-circle around him. But even these did not dare to speak to him or approach him closely. There had been a great many references in Europe, newspapers of late, to the mayor's desire to make of Glastonbury a sort of English Lourdes, where an atmosphere of miraculous healing is charged with the electricity of faith, and everyone present felt that something momentous was in the air. For it was not only sick people who were now awaiting this man in the road below. There always had lingered among the natives of Glastonbury an obstinate notion that this Grail spring possessed healing qualities. And no doubt Ned Attling's writings in The Wayfarer had played upon this obscure belief and steered it up. At any rate, it is certain that there had spread through Paradise and Bove Town a rumor that the mayor wanted all the Glastonbury sick people who could possibly be moved to come to the Grail Font that day. And along with these sick people, something else had been carried to the foot of Chalice Hill, something with a capital S, that now awaited him there. Moving straight towards the small dead form, carried upon a stretcher, while the sick people, none of whom was seriously ill, forgot their own condition as they watched him, Mr. Geard followed the example of the prophet in the Old Testament and stretched himself upon the wooden bier, covering the dead child's body with his own. What dead body? All right. The man's disciples, while he did this, kept the child's relatives from approaching, all except the mother, whose hands, as she knelt, pressed the child's feet to her breasts. Now, was there a dead child mentioned earlier? I don't remember that, if there was. Okay. What skeptics said afterwards was that no doctor had seen the child since he died, and what the parents had mistaken for death was in reality a death-like trance, from which the exceptional animal magnetism of the mayor's heavy form naturally aroused him. This was the very view taken of the incident by Dr. Fell, one of my favorite characters, who came upon the scene soon after the child's revival. Meanwhile, inside the rotunda, John Crow, who was not one of my favorite characters, was coming to his senses. When he did so, he found his friend Tom bending over him, and Tom's overcoat spread out across his legs. "You're shivering, Tom," he whispered. Barter made a wry face at him. "You haven't seen what I've just seen, or you wouldn't be surprised if my teeth were chattering." John sighed. He made a weak motion with his hand. "What's up? What's he doing now?" Barter realized that he was talking about Gerd, and without delay he poured out his extraordinary story. "It's a little boy who died this morning. They brought him on a stretcher. I saw the kid once myself. His mother's a drunken bitch who lived in my house. I knew who it was the moment I heard the woman's voice. Two terrible old trots, Betsy Burt and Mrs. Carey, were with her when I saw the child then, and they were with her just now. They all lived in my house. I fetched the doctor once for the child myself. Dr. Fell said it was a sort of epilepsy." Did he know they brought him before he made his speech? Barter cast a hurried glance around the edifice in which they were holding this intense and strange conversation. In his mind, there was this dim thought that there is something monstrous and horrible about bringing the dead to life, something that interferes with nature and has an obscure and shocking profanity in it. He stared at what was around them in his queer building. It was crowded with litter and scaffolding, for it was but half finished. but there was a peculiar personal quality in the workmanship and in the materials that separated it from all the newly erected buildings that he had ever seen. It might be something erected to Gerd, he thought, rather than by Gerd. Did he know they brought him, Tom? How do I know what he knew? You know him better than I. I don't believe he knew, whispered John. They were both silent then, and something very peculiar passed between them. There were certain topics which resembled certain substances in the world, such as blood and semen, and the liquefaction of decomposition. I think he means poop there. And that they trouble some unique nerve in human mortality and produce, even in the naming, a peculiar frisson. Such a frisson they experienced now, and as they gazed in each other's face in this dim, littered, empty place, these two cynical East Anglicans felt like dogs who had met an absolutely new smell. Dogs, let us say, who were sniffing at a new fallen meteorite. Dead? Why didn't sniff, and what that look was he? And did old Gerd? Barter nodded like a China mandarin. Yes, old cock, yes, my sweet cod. Gerd did it. Brought it to life? Yes, old topknot, to life, old whiteface. Where's Tossie? She's with Miss Crow and Lady Rachel. They were both silent, then, for a while. And during their silence, the uttermost mystery of the world, this unspeakable coldness, stiffness, stillness of an organism that has lived and breathed, and now had been changed into something else, held them by the throat. This child, they both thought, has been behind life, and if it could only remember what that something else, capital S, capital E. Where were those two who were here, Shepherd and Mrs. Mary? Mr. Mary? Where were they there? Were they here? They've gone to look at the child. They'll kill it again, crowding round it. Do you think what I think, John? I think the whole thing has been... Barter was going to say planned, but once more that shivering took him, and in his mind he saw that ghastly rigor mortis which holds the secret of the universe. John made a desperate struggle to get up. I'd like to see that child, he murmured, rising up on his elbow. I'd like to see someone who has really been dead. Dead, old cock, but not buried. Cataleptic, old man. I can't breathe properly, groaned John. I feel as weak as a baby. I wish you'd get him to come to me. Oh, shut up, you fool. You'll be all right in a jiffy. Water, moaned John. If I don't have a drop of water, I'll go off again. The child was sitting up on the stretcher. They were feeding it. Water, moaned John. Water. Barter gave one more hurried glance at the strange interior around them. Then he went out quickly into the air. Hurrying under the Saxon arch, the irony of fate thus brought it about that the first two persons to use that new entrance were Philip and his ex-manager. He filled one of the little cups that were kept there and brought it to his friend. Chalibate, he said with a leer, as John satisfied his craving and showed signs of recovery. Or Christ's precious blood, you can toss up which it is. The prostrate man jerked himself up on his elbow and stared at the rotunda door which Tom had left open. I'd like to know, he muttered, what dreams that child had. Barter gave vent to a quick welcoming shout and ran again to the door. A reading from the book of Glastonbury. Amen. I shouldn't do that, that's sacrilegious. Especially on Sunday. Anyway, till next time, I'll see you in Glastonbury. Cheers.